Hi everyone, I'm very, very happy to be here with highly respected author, conservationist, and journalist Brian Jackman. He has been one of the leading Africa journalists throughout his illustrious career, which is still ongoing. There's too many articles, too many books to even mention, but we're going to go over some of them here. He was close friends with George Adamson and is now a trustee of the George Adamson Wildlife Preservation Trust, and is a very passionate and vocal conservationist, and we're very, very fortunate to be able to chat to him. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Jambo, Molibwanji.
Jambo. So, obviously, we've got to start from the beginning, because where did this kind of passion for Africa come from? Where did it start?
Well, strange enough, it came from my father, who never got any farther abroad than a booze cruise to Calais. But he always used to bring home library books, big game hunting stories, and when he brought them home, I lapped them up, every book he read, until all these wonderful names, Ngorongoro, Okavango, Serengeti, they resounded in my head like talking drums, and I thought, I've got to go to Africa. But, I had no money. How could it's beyond, it was completely beyond me. So there was no way I could realise my dreams until finally I fell into journalism and got myself a job as a travel writer at the Sunday Times in 1970. And this is the magic key, the ticket. I could go anywhere. So they wanted to send me to places I ventured first, Torremolinos. No, I want to go to Africa. And after a while, they got the message, and amazingly, there was nobody writing about wildlife and wild places. There was a niche to exploit. As you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and so I saw my chance. Until in the end, the more I wrote about wildlife and wild places, they got the message. And in the end, they said, "No, don't send him to Torremolinos. It's the wrong kind of tundra for him."
Do you remember the first Africa trip you ever did?
How could I forget it? I flew down to the Mara in the early 1970s, just after the long rains. The grass was green. I thought Africa would be dry and like a desert full of thorns and dust. And instead it looked more like Ireland. And we came in flying low over the savannah, and herds of elephant and buffalo running away under the wings, and then we touched down, and I thought, even before we'd landed, I thought, I'm going to love this. And then needless to say, what did I want to see most? I wanted to see a lion. And so we drove out next morning, and it was still cold. There was dew on the grass, and the sun was up, and we heard a lion. And I saw him quite a long way off, and I watched him through binoculars. And he sat on an anthill, and he roared. And because he was so far away, every time he roared, what I first saw was this sort of dragon's breath condensing in the cold air. And then the roar after, so there was puff of air, and puff, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I thought, how could you not want to come back to Africa after an experience like that? It was utterly magical. And that was I was bitten. That was it. That was the moment, for sure.
Yeah. And that article, obviously, coming back to write it for the Sunday Times, did they then realise, okay, this guy is going to be in Africa for the foreseeable future?
Yes, I think they did, because there was nobody else doing it. This was the other lovely thing to have started writing what was ecotourism. Before the word was invented, I was writing about ecotourism. So in one sense, you could say I was a kind of, I don't know, not a founding father, but a prophet.
A pioneer.
A pioneer, absolutely. And it was all there to do. So it was, and the more I went, the more I learned, and the more amazing people I met. One of the first trips I went out to Nairobi, and I met Ian Douglas Hamilton, the great elephant man.
Yeah.
So he was this very distinguished guy, and I'd only met him on my last night in Nairobi. I was heading back for the airport. We just had a drink, and it was typical Kenyan hospitality. He drove me out to the airport. I thought, how fantastic is that? We've been friends ever since. That was typical of the people who live in Africa.
Yeah, it's people often go to Africa for the wildlife, don't they? But when they get there, they realise it's the people that make it special.
Yeah, it's full of the most extraordinary people, and it shapes those kinds of people who live there. And where else do you live in environments sometimes where you need to maybe shoot a rogue buffalo, fly a plane, set up a two-way radio. I mean, there's all this stuff instead of just sitting at home with your feet up watching television. So it creates extraordinary individuals.
Yeah, and did you get back to Africa several times in those early years of your journalism career?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I started
relentlessly.
Relentlessly, once or twice, at least. Sometimes not every year.
Yeah.
So that from now, somebody asked me about a year or so, how many times you've been on safari? And I thought, well, okay, 100 times. I lost count after I got to 100. It's just if I tried to add up all the days I've spent under canvas in the African bush, it would add up to about 3 or 4 years of my life. So it's such an unbelievable privilege when you think that from many people, if they can go at all, it's just a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, but you've made your career out of it, which is incredible.
So blessed, so lucky.
And were those assignments a combination of kind of conservation focused and focusing on new lodges and camps? Because obviously at that time there was a lot happening in Africa with tourism, wasn't there?
Oh, I've watched it completely
seen it
changed.
From the
I
beginning.
rather regret the days when I love a basic camp with a bucket shower, and now sometimes you get it's like a canvas suite the size of a tithe bar full of 5-star luxuries, which is no problem. I can hack that out. But I still like the old. Basically, it's being in the bush with amazing, fantastic, sharp-eyed guides who become your bosom companions and very often friends for life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're so right. And in those early days when you had the more rustic camps, it was easier for people to take a camp exclusively, which is always the best option. I think now things have gone onto such a stage where that's become a lot more difficult. So you eventually freelanced, didn't you? Which obviously did that give you scope to kind of go to places in Africa which you wanted to kind of assign yourself?
Yes, I did. I mean, in the end, after working as a journalist for the Sunday Times, which was fantastic, when I joined the paper, the editor was Harold Evans, the best editor ever. And he used to say, "Come on, guys, we want you to work really hard, but have fun doing it." And that was the ethos. And we would run through a brick wall for Harry. So it was a great. Anyway, the things changed, and in 20 years I decided it was time to. There was the Fortress Wapping saga. I don't know if you remember that, and it was time for me to jump over the razor wire to freedom. And I came out and freedom. I still wrote for a while for the Sunday Times, but increasingly for the Telegraph nowadays.
Yeah.
A lot of my old Sunday Times colleagues had also moved on, and there they were at the Telegraph as well. So it was
they followed in your footsteps.
Not such a quantum leap.
No. And then obviously you've written quite a few books. Do the books take you away from your well, it's all still journalism obviously, but do they take you away from writing assignments for the newspapers and the magazines as well, or because do you have to focus on those?
All
tied in,
all happening at the same time, squeezing in side by side. And I mean the first book, I suppose, was the Marsh Lions, through having met up with Jonathan Scott when he was starting out on his incredibly illustrious career. And that was so exciting. I turned up just to write a piece about the Masai Mara. And I was introduced, "This is your guide, his name is Jonathan." And we went off, and the first thing he said, "Look," he said, I'd love to show you this pride of lions. I call them the marsh lions because their core territory is an area called Musiara Marsh in the heart of the Masai Mara." And sure enough, off we went to see them. And at the time, I was so much in love with Africa, and I wanted to write something about Africa, to give something back, for the pleasure to give. And suddenly I thought there was the marsh lions, reminded me of the marsh Arabs, Thesiger. And I thought, okay, I've got a title. Jonathan, why don't we put this together and see if we can't do a book? And so out of that came the Marsh Lions, which was a sort of foresight saga of lion family life, all these individuals who, after watching them on and off over 5 years, I could recognise them as, they were as familiar to me as you are sitting in front of me right here now. Notch, Brando, Scar, and Makuba, the big three bride males, were the fantastic.
Very impressive.
In fact, one of them had quite a fun moment. Was in camp one afternoon with Jonathan, and one of the camp staff came rushing into our tent having a cup of tea. He said, one of the Simba is in the camp, the lion has come into the camp. And Jonathan picks up a camp chair, you know these canvas directors' chairs with the legs poking out, and he walks out as if to, and we step outside the camp, and there only about 10 or 12 feet away is Brando, this lion, we call him Brandy because he had a hairstyle like Marlon Brando. And so I better do the same, so I picked up a chair and followed Jonathan, and there we are, we're looking at this lion, and we're all staring at each other, and who's going to back down? And eventually the lion just went, woof, and he trotted off. Wow. And I thought, well, all these people who go trophy hunting and shooting lions, if you want an adrenaline buzz, don't bother to shoot a lion, just walk up to one with a chair and see what that does for you.
Yeah, that's a true adrenaline filled moment with a lion, for sure. And then you also co-authored Big Cat Diary with Jonathan Swift as well.
Yes.
And so how long did those two books take you with it? Because you said you were watching the Marsh Lions for over a period of 5 years.
Over 5 years. I mean, Jonathan was there all the time, of course. And so we built up a story. It had, like all good stories, it had to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And the beginning happened when, again, a trophy hunter came into the Mara and shot one of the pride males.
Really?
And this set the whole thing going with new males coming in, taking over the pride. And then the cubs were born and raised. And at the end of that period, after their tenure for about 3, 4, 5 years, the old pride males were getting older, and they again were challenged by a coalition of nomads moving in. And this is what happens over and over again in lion society all over. So that made the story really is a sort of love letter to the Masai Mara, because everything is covered. The migration, the cheetahs, the elephants, the long rains coming, the droughts, the wildebeest crossing the Mara River. I mean, everything that is there is celebrated, if you like, in the book, and all its triumphs and tragedies.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you used to go and stay with Jonathan in a kind of camp that they had set up there, or?
Most of the time we would stay at Governor's Camp.
Yes, exactly. It's always the host of kind of Big Cat Diary and all of that, isn't it? Yeah.
It was a lovely home from home.
Magical time, I can well imagine. So lots of people, including me, are going to want to know about your friendship with George Adamson. Obviously, he's very, very, very famous.
Yes.
And, there's been so much written about him, movies made, and he is a very iconic figure of Africa. And lots of people I know would wish that they had been able to meet him.
Oh, he's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful man. It's a strange way I got to meet him. And if you may recall, that Joy Adamson was murdered by one of her camp staff.
Yeah.
And the word came through. I turned up at the Sunday Times on a Monday morning, and I got the message, the editor wants to see you. I thought, oh my God, what have I done now? I went up to his office and said, you've heard about poor Joy? And I said, yes, I have. He said, well, you know Africa, you know Kenya a bit. I'd been a few times by then.
Yeah.
And he said, do you think you could go there and get the story? And I said, but Harry, I'm not a hard-nosed news reporter. I'm just a travel writer from the soft, soggy end of the newspaper. And he said, well, do you think you can do it? So I said, can I just make a quick phone call? So I phoned friends in Nairobi and said, what should I do? And they said, oh, George is flying down into Nairobi for the funeral. Just get on the plane. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I went to Nairobi in the suit I stood up in. I happened to have my passport. I had a toothbrush. They gave me an air ticket and some money, and I flew to Nairobi. So the first thing I did next morning was to get a safari suit run up, which you can do in Nairobi in a few hours. So then at least I felt I blended into the background. I I went to the funeral. I met George. I got the story. I filed it, and at the end of it all, George said, "I say, old boy, how would you like it? Would you like to fly back to Cora to see my lions?" And I said, "You're joking." He said, "No, I've got a plane. I have a pilot. Would you like to come?" So immediately at Sunday Times, I said, "Listen, I'm going to be a few days late," and we flew up to Cora. And first of all, he wanted to see his lions, and he was desperate that was the first thing he wanted to do. And so we climbed into his clapped out old Land Rover. He used to have the words "any more for the nightingale" printed on the side. He threw some camel meat in the back, and we drove down to the Tana River. And then he stepped out and he started calling. He had a lioness, I can't remember what she was called now, but he started calling for her. The way you call her, Arusha, she was called.
Arusha.
So, as if you would call your Labrador, Arusha. And out of the bushes, down came Arusha. She just killed a waterbuck. She had blood all over her muzzle. And she ran at George. I thought, oh my God, I can see another headline. George Anderson. Yeah. And she ran at him, and she put her huge forepaw, she stood on her hind leg, put her front paws over her shoulder, and he hugged her. And she was making these lovely, lion. And he was going, oh, patted, Arusha, lovely to see you. And he turned around to me, and he said, I shouldn't get out of the car if I was you, old boy. And I thought, I have no idea, no intention. And I sat there, and if it had a window, you couldn't wind it up because the Land Rover was in such a state. And she saw me, and she turned around and padded over. And her head was, and this close up, it's huge, it fills and I could smell the blood on her breast. She didn't smell very nice. And we looked at each other, and then she wandered off. Oh. And I thought this was my introduction to Cora and Campia Simba, Lion Camp, which was just the most wonderful place. It was like an inside-outside zoo where all humans lived inside the barbed wire and the lions were on the outside. But other creatures came in, and every morning George would go around with a bucket of corn, and all his guinea fowl would come in, and he would throw corn, and they go round and round his feet. And he used to say, this is odd, you know, they always go this way round. I wonder if I was on the other side of the equator, if they'd go in the other direction. And then there were a couple of vultures that sat on a wire, on the wire, the wire around the common, who called Bourne and Hollingsworth. And there were two fan-tailed ravens called Crikey and Croaky. And then inexplicably, a very large monitor lizard who lived in the thatch. And so here we lived with Hamisi as a wonderful cook, and my great friend Tony Fitzjohn, without whom the whole show could not have kept on going. Tony just kept everything on the he was
in
great with the lions. He was good with George. He was good with the radio. I mean, in the end, he emerged from George's not inconsiderable shadow to be an African hero in his own right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you been to Tony's place in Tanzania, to Mkomazi?
Yes, I have, yes.
I hear that's very, very impressive as well.
Yeah, they've done wonders with reintroducing black rhino and wild dogs.
Yeah.
But they're now about to, they're pulling out quite, I think it's a question of job done, and I rather think if there's a future for Tony, it possibly lies in, with a bit of luck, in returning to Cora, the sort of unfinished business, if you like.
Yeah.
The other nice thing about staying at Cora was, everything was an adventure, even going to the loo, because George had this, basically the loo was a trench with two planks across it, and on the planks was balanced the lower jawbone of an elephant, so that's where you sat. And sometimes I would have to go out at night, and I would sit there and sitting in the dark and thinking, because it's a potentially dangerous area, a lot of Somali banditry, which is what did for George. At least I thought, oh my God, I hope they haven't got a bead lined up on me as I sit there. But it was what happy days.
Yeah. I did hear that they were trying to do something with Cora, and you'll know a lot more about it because of your interest in the wildlife trust.
It deserves to be reintegrated into the scheme of things in in Kenya.
Absolutely.
Especially with all its history.
Yeah. Watch this space type of situation at the moment. And then you've already mentioned Ian Douglas Hamilton, who's obviously the Elephant Man, as you rightly say. You obviously have known him, it sounds like, most of your career, and he's obviously become a close friend. You were very involved with the push that everyone had in Kenya to stop the poaching, or help to try and slow it down a bit a number of years ago.
Yes, I mean, Ian's expertise and knowledge was invaluable, as was that of Esmond Bradley Martin, who used to gather the most extraordinary intelligence as to poaching of ivory and rhino horns and where they were going on the back of the trade. And Esmond I would meet in London, just down the Grazing Road from the Sunday Times. He was quite a well-to-do, well-off fellow. He wasn't at all impoverished, and I think he used to stay in a very smart hotel. But when we met, he used to go around to a greasy spoon cafe and have a cup of tea and a bacon sandwich, and then he would deliver all the amazing information without which I could never have, got the story out and exposed a lot of the bad things that were going on.
Yeah.
And it was pretty desperate at times. There was I went down once into Tsavo National Park when it was nobody was allowed to go into the park. There was a war going on, and certainly not journalists. But I got smuggled in, and I saw what the poachers had been doing. The most desperately tragic sight of elephants with their faces chopped off. And all for the bloody ivory. It's Aurea, Ian's wife. You say ivory is something that rich men buy and nobody needs, and that's so true.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, I met. Well, at that time, when I first met them, their children were young, but now Saba is this marvelous bush lady in her own right, running elephant watch camp in Samburu. And a few years ago, I was lucky enough to go back there and spend some time. And I thought, this is the place if you want to see elephants and learn about elephant behaviour. There's nowhere better in Africa. And off we drove. We hadn't gone that far when in front of us was this enormous, very mature bull elephant, obviously deep in must. In this season when they're pumped up with testosterone. And I thought, oh my God. And Saba said, this is Edison, I want you to meet Edison. And I thought, well, I wondered to myself, is this a good idea? She was driving, she had a Samburu guide in all his wonderful tribal gear sitting in the passenger seat, and I was immediately behind him, all open windows as Land Cruisers are. So she stops the vehicle, and Edison then strides forward. He came up to us, and then out went the trunk. And I was sitting there with my short sleeve shirt, and the tip of his trunk ran about an inch away up my arm, right up past my face. I could feel his breath, and it was hovering in front of my face. And I didn't move, I didn't even look. And then he turned away, he walked round behind the vehicle, and then inexplicably he laid his trunk and his tusk at full length on the canvas roof. And he just stood there, and time stopped. And in the silence, I could hear the wood doves, the boop, 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 boop. And it sort of matched my heartbeat. Boop, 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 boop. And then eventually he turned. You know how elephants do. And he went, 5 tons of elephant. Disappears like smoke. You never hear him go. And then Saba turned around and said, "Oh, well done, Brian. You passed the flinch test with flying colours." And what was so wonderful about that experience, because we had been talking about being around elephants and knowing their behaviour, was that first of all, Saba knew
the elephant very well.
The elephant knew Saba. Saba was lucky that I knew that not to scream or squeal or shout, and we all knew each other, and so it was this wonderful interaction, which I wouldn't have missed for the world. It's one of the loveliest moments I've ever spent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how intelligent elephants are to be able to kind of read the signs of like knowing Saba and Saba being relaxed around you and you being relaxed around Saba. So.
Especially when you know what elephants can do. I mean, in Ian's camp just down the road, there's the remains of a Land Cruiser that was trashed by a couple of elephants who they had a bit of a disagreement and they had a full-on crash, and then one took off and then the other one, feeling so disgruntled, he decided to take his vent his anger on the Land Cruiser, and I think that whoever was driving the vehicle eventually managed to get out through the broken windscreen
kind of pull away,
and hid in the roots of a tree until the elephant had pushed off. So it just shows that, I mean, of all the big game, for me the elephant is the one that even if you're in a vehicle, as I'd say, can ruin your entire day. What they do.
No, they're definitely owed a lot of respect when you're out in the bush.
Yeah.
You've got they've got kind of human-like emotions, haven't they? And you've got to treat them in that way.
Yeah, very much so. Very intelligent.
God, how amazing! And what are your thoughts on the state of conservation in Africa at the moment? Obviously, with coronavirus, there have been some reports that poaching's slightly gone up in some areas. I'm sure that will be got back to the level it was before quite shortly.
I think meat poaching would be a bigger
bushmeats,
problem.
As
I was saying, ever since I started out into journalism, all I've ever written about is ecotourism.
Yeah.
And to see it now lying in ruins, really, it's almost too much to bear. It's rather like seeing, in terms of conservation, when endangered species, the mere fact that they're being lost on our watch, I find that really. I just hate it when the bad guys win. We have it in our power to turn things around.
Yeah.
And it's all still there. We're sitting here now. I know right now the wildebeest are pouring across the Sand River into the Masai Mara. It's all happening. The leopards are sleeping in their fig trees. Somewhere out there, the marsh lions will be lying in the grass, and they'll get around as soon as the sun goes down and start. You hear that marvelous, the most wonderful sound in Africa.
In the world, almost.
And I like the coda at the end. I lie awake in my tent at night when I'm waiting for it. I can't go to sleep until I hear that, and then it's okay. When I'm living here in Dorset, I think about that and think, can't wait to hear that sound. Or sometimes if a leopard comes through camp, that sound like a log being.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so exciting.
Can you do a hyena as well, Brian?
Well, I can. Did you know the strangest thing? The thing that people who haven't been to Africa, and they have no idea. If I were to go, they say, "What the hell is that?" You say, "It's a zebra." A zebra? Really? And Annabelle, my wife, she absolutely loves wildebeest. And, to camp out in the middle of the Serengeti when you're surrounded by 1.2 million wildebeest, one or two others are going, and you multiply that by 1.2 million, and there's this wonderful infinite chorus going on. It's just bliss.
It is extraordinary that those night noises do confuse people, and I do find myself
like a little and then you count 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. I'm quite nervous about buffalo, and I promise you I can conjure a buffalo eating outside my tent from my imagination. Oh, we had one. It got between the canvas wall of the tent and the metal stanchions outside, and it walked along between the two. So every time it came to stanchion, its horns click, blink, clink like this. It's just the other side of a flimsy bit of canvas, And sometimes people at home who haven't been, they say, "Aren't you terrified when you're lying in your tent?" And I said, "No, they just can never get the zips undone with their huge hooves." But buffalo are seriously bad news.
Yeah, they are, exactly. But actually at night, it's amazing how safe you are in those tents and how safe you feel.
Yeah, I've always felt completely safe when you're zipped up there.
Yeah, we
It's a lovely
always
feeling.
find clients that have gone to maybe South Africa for their first safari where there's a lot of fences around the camps.
Yes,
They say, for the next one, Rose, you will make sure there's no fences around the camp. You know, it's to be in the thick of it like that is the kind of dream for people.
And I think people say, rightly or wrongly, if you spent your safari in a lodge, you've been on holiday.
Yes.
If you've been on safari, you've got to be under canvas. And there is a kind of difference. Just to be as close as possible to touch the wild.
To the action.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely. And, you know, coming down in the morning to meet your guide or have a cup of tea before your game drive and hearing what the Askaris have seen in camp at night, even if you've slept through it, it's just amazing.
So it is. And I mean, in Kenya, it's so nice if you're in a tent and the guy will come and bring you a coffee. And of course, either they say knock knock because it's canvas, you can't knock.
Yeah.
Or hoodie, karibu, come in. You know, it's just a lovely one. And then there is a big, happy, smiling face, and there's the coffee, and then out you go. And the air is crisp. It's, you know, because this is the other thing. Certainly, if you're in the Mara or Serengeti, although you're only 100 miles or so from the equator, you're hoisted up 5,000 or 6,000 feet in the air, so the air is like wine. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. No, those mornings in the bush are something else. They are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I definitely every time that first sunrise is over, I'll start be looking forward to the next morning already because it's so magical.
Yeah, and I lie there sometimes. You tick off the berth, white-browed robin chat, you know, there's the swamp nightjar on, and then sooner or later, yes, they're out there. Let's go and find the boys, see what they've been up to in the night.
Oh, there's nothing more exciting. We wanted to talk. Well, I wanted to know what your favourite parts of Africa have been that you visited. I know it probably is difficult because it depends on the kind of experience you have, isn't it, when you're there? But obviously, the Mara is going to be very much site home to you.
Yes, I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, here I live in Dorset, and I probably know the Mara certainly as well as I know Dorset, if not better. But I would say, Mara Serengeti. I had been several times to the Mara and had not been down into the Serengeti, but had driven down to where you look down south, and there it is. And just, you know, one of these days I'm going to get down and see what it's like. And finally I did, and it's just wonderful. And I met this marvellous photographer, filmmaker, Hugo van Lawick, and he had his own camp just out at Ndutu, just outside the southern end of the Serengeti, southwestern end of the Serengeti National Park. It was known as Hugo's Hilton. He lived there in some style. And I was lucky enough to be asked to write the script for a film he was making about cheetahs called the Blood Brothers. And so what we used to do would be to get up very early and drive into the park while it was still dark to avoid Hugo having to pay park fees. And then we drive right across over towards the Gold Koppies, this wonderful, wonderful open country. And they would sit and wait for the cheetahs and sit there until about, the sun went out, the heat went out of the day and the sun was going down. The last couple of days, that golden hour that you get when all the Thompson gazelles start prancing around, and that's the time for the cheetahs. They do that lovely stretch, get up, stretch, bum in the air, and then it's hunting time. And then Hugo, who until that time had been drinking endless cups of coffee and smoking cigarettes, suddenly it was time to crank up the camera.
Get to work.
And we see this wonderful action on the open plains, and then after that we'd drive home and get back to Hugo's Hilton and have a shower and
reminisce about what you've seen.
Around the campfire. Happy days. And so this was when quite recently I was fortunate enough to go to Namiri Plains and renew my acquaintance with this is probably the part of Africa that I love the best. The
Gold Koppies area.
Yeah, all the Gold Koppies, the Barafu Koppies, these great stone battlements looming out of the endless grasslands, and the feeling that you could just drive on forever and never want it to come to an end.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just lovely. Having said that, there are other wonderful, wonderful areas where I've had the most fantastic adventures. Zambia's Luangwa Valley, for one.
I'm obsessed with Zambia.
And the more times I go, the more I feel my obsession with East Africa sort of weakening. I think I could be
feeling a bit guilty.
Yeah, feeling rather guilty. There's a lovely camp in the north called Kaingo, which is a local word for leopard. And the leopards is what you see, and wild dogs and brilliant lion, everything.
And no people.
And very few people. And lovely guys running the camps, Derek Shenton, and then Okavango Delta. Nowhere else like it. Utterly stunning. And to travel by Mokoro, these little wooden. It's like African gondolier. You're just cruising through the lily pads, kingfishers and frogs, and white-necked otters, and then elephants, and it's all just amazing. And it's just about the flattest place on earth, but flat doesn't translate into boring.
No,
it's the most wonderful.
Yeah,
and is it the world's biggest freshwater oasis?
I'll have to confirm that.
But it's colossal. It's an absolute paradise. So to make up your mind as if you only had one safari left in your life, where would you go? It's quite a tough call, but because of old experiences and acquaintanceships and old friendships, going back with Jonathan and the Marsh Lions, I think it would have to be
back to
Mara, and now to the conservancies which have sprung up along the borders of the National Reserve, whereas like all over Africa, lion numbers are going down. It's talk maybe only 20,000 or so lions left in the whole of Africa. It's tragic. And if you imagine of those full-on pride males, they're rarer than black rhinos, which is unbelievable. But on those conservancies, they've had the highest densities of lion anywhere. And you go and stay on the conserve like Mara North and Nabusha. And if you want to see lions, you'll see them. For sure.
Well, we were very happy to have organised that trip to Namiri Plains, and as I said, let's do the Mara next year.
Oh yes. The other lovely thing, of course, is when you go, you just see lions. But the more times you go to the same place, you realise these guys, there are individuals with their family, and they all get given names. And this trip to Namiri, which you very kindly organised for me a couple of years ago, there was this fantastic two lions.
It was in September.
Yes, it was
September,
the oldest lion in the Serengeti. They thought he died, but we found him still alive, just about alive. Ziggy was his name. And all these characters, you get to know them as individuals. Mara, a beautiful female leopard called Nalangu. And her mother, I think, was called Zawadi, Gift. And Zawadi was the daughter of Halftail, who Jonathan Scott wrote about, The Leopard's Tale.
Yes.
So there is a kind of, as I said, a Forsyte saga of big cat histories. And they're all known, they all have names and family trees, and the more you get involved. So wherever I go now, I see a lion. If I go to a new area, I don't know, I'm desperate to know who is this lion? Which pride does this lion belong to? What is their history? And it's so frustrating when you know nothing about it.
No, it is absolutely fascinating, and that's why the guiding is key, isn't it, when you're going to a new area? Because actually it's, and I also find with if there are elephant herds in the area as well, I quite like to know what the situation is there with that family dynamic, and
the quality of guiding has improved beyond all recognition.
Is that something you've noticed over the years?
Years ago, I remember going out with a lovely guide, and I saw a bird. I said, "What is that?" He said, "Ndegi," which means Ndegi is a bird. Well, thanks, guy. That's really helpful. And now, if you say, "What is that?" they'll give you its
Latin name.
Yeah, people like Jackson in the Mara, a wonderful Masai guide who started out in life as a little sort of raggedy, I was going to say raggedy bear-ass kid. Collecting honey. He would chin up a tree with a bunch of smoking grass and smoke out the bees and get stung like hell, and then run home with all the honey back to his family. And he used to run through the bush to school, 5 miles there and 5 miles back. And then out of his experience, he eventually joined a camp. He got a job as a tracker, and then he became a guide, and now he's got his own camp. He's
been on Big Cat Diary.
He's been on Big Cat Diary. He can tell you the name of everything that lives, breathes, and crawls in English, Swahili, and Masai Mara. This is how much things have changed, how much things have advanced, and you get these wonderful gold and silver star guides.
Yeah.
And they're not just there to point out the name. They can share jokes. They'll pour your coffee.
They're charismatic.
They become your life buddies. They are the best people you could ever wish to meet.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so, lastly, just to finish off, although I hope we'll chat about this for a while, because I would like to know all your most exciting wildlife encounters. I know there'll be too many, because I think we could be sat here for about 2 days.
We've spoken about
Edison.
We've spoken about Edison. I'm just.
Lions are your big passion in life, aren't they? Have you had any apart from when you had to fend off Brando with a chair? Have you had any others that kind of stick in your mind with lions?
Yes, well, it was especially when I was still fairly new to Africa, and I went one year on a camel safari up into the northern Kenya, which is a wonderful experience, and you feel like a lord of the earth because you're hoisted right there up on top of a camel, and you sway along with what somebody described as a sort of fornicatory motion. and you have the Masai, like Kibiak Masai guys in all their finery walking with you, and as you walk, they're singing. You have the solo. He goes, oh yeah, no, yeah, and then all the rest join in, and then the hair stands up. It's so exciting. You feel like the lords of the world.
Yeah.
And I said, what are they singing about? And they said, they're singing about their cows. Their Masai think all the cattle in the world belong to them. And, our cows are so beautiful.
Yeah.
And this is what this is about. And anyway, time to camp. So we come down to a sand river, and the camp is all set up, and they bed the camels down. We have a supper and a shower and a campfire drink. And I was taken off. I was still new to Africa, and I was taken off to my little flimsy fly camp in the boat. And I was at the end of the line.
And camp tents really are.
And a fly camp
flimsy,
is like a mosquito net on 4 poles.
Yeah.
And inside is a trestle bed on which you lay like some sacrificial offering. and then they leave you. There I'm alone in this black and silver night. And you hear all the little crickets and the scaups owls and the chirruping away. And I'm lying there, and then it starts. Oh my God, it's a lion. It's quite a long way. And I listen, and it goes quiet, and then much nearer. My heart goes up a notch instead of like this. And it goes quiet again. I'm looking out, all I can see is shadow and moonlight, nothing. And then, whoa, like this. It feels as if, I know you can hear a lion from 5 miles away, so there's no telling how far away this lion was, but it was. It
sounded
around,
very close.
And all the camels tied down in the sand river, they have these wooden bells like the ones I've got up on my wall here, and they go clunk, 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 because they're all starting. Oh my God, it's a lion! And then it goes whoa, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I pulled the blanket over my head and went to sleep. And I thought, really, I suppose, why do they want to eat a stringy old journalist past his sell-by date anyway.
They've got all these delicious camels sitting right there.
So that was a bit of a moment, I must say.
Yeah.
But apart from that, no.
Lions have been quite well behaved. So if you know about lions, you know how to.
Yes, that is the whole thing. When you know, I know some they haven't all read the book, but you know how they should respond, and they're much bolder at night. I remember going on a night drive once in an open Land Rover with no superstructure, and a lion strolled past, just a few, and he stared in, and you just think,
this is your territory now.
We're in his area. I was quite happy to move on.
When they do look at you with those eyes, you feel very much under scrutiny.
Yeah.
But luckily, as you say, they are very well behaved lions, and I think certainly all the places that we deal with, all the guides that we deal with, would very much know how to treat a lion with respect and read it properly. And hopefully, then you shouldn't get yourself in any trouble.
When they look as though they're looking right through your head, right into your soul,
it's a little bit unnerving.
It is unnerving. Yeah.
And you haven't had any other ellies or hippos or buffalo?
Hippos! Oh my God, yeah. Hippos. I was driving with a lovely guy called Jock Anderson. He had a camp in the Mara. He was the guy who actually employed Jonathan back in the day. And we were driving towards the Mara River, and he said, "That's odd." He said, "There are all those hippos there. They look as though they want to go into the river, but they're holding back." He said, "Maybe there's a lion on the other side. I tell you what we do, let's go down and have a look." He said, "Leave your binoculars behind." And I should have twigged what was going to happen there. So I left the binoculars, and we crept through the grass, into the bushes, and as we approached, there were about 30 hippos, and 29 of them rushed into the water. And the last one turned around and came for us. And we turned and ran. And you know what you say, if you want to be safe, take somebody who can't run as fast as... Well, I was about a yard ahead of the shot. And we came boiling out of the bush. My wife was with me, watching from the land. And as we came into the long grass, of course, you had to step high. So you looked like ostriches going flat out. We kept on going. What we didn't realise that as soon as we had got out of the bush into the open country, the hippos stopped.
Yeah.
We just kept on going because we didn't know.
You don't even want to look behind you when you know you've got a hippo.
And another time we were out at out in the Okavango, a place called Pampan, and there had been a fight between two bull hippos, and one had killed the other, and the carcass was now being dismantled by a pride of lions, and then there were just all lionesses were there, and then this attracted hyenas, and then the hyenas came in and chased off the lionesses, and then there was a standoff, and then a male lion came back and started the whole thing. All these shapes.
Very dramatic.
While this was happening, a storm blew out, a sandstorm. The wind came in, the air turned red with flying dust, and all these phantom shapes flying there, hyenas and lions. And all this time we were parked alongside the pool in which the hippo had been. And what we had completely forgotten, there's still one hippo left. And all of a sudden it came out of the water and came for us with its jaws, came right up to the vehicle, looked right into its mouth. The next minute I was the other side of the vehicle in my wife's lap. That was as close as you ever want to be to a hippo.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I'm not sure how I would...
buffalo. Have you had a buffalo chase a vehicle? Chased it. Oh, and another time we had elephants. Oh my God, yeah. I was trying to remember I ought to remember the name of who took us. He heard that we were driving through the Okavango, through the delta, and a vehicle came flat out of the trees and slowed down. What's going on? He said, "Oh, I wouldn't go down there. There's this really angry cow elephant. He's just given us a terrible revving, So the driver, oh, excellent, that sounds good. So we drive down there, and I thought, is this wise? And sure enough, we run into the cow elephant, and she comes for us. And so he hasn't even got time to reverse the vehicle, so he puts it in reverse and goes flat out through that soft Kalahari sand, so the wheels are spinning, and it was sort of touch and go. Is this elephant going to, And I think the tuskless cows are often more dangerous just because they have no tusks. They seem to make up for it with extra aggression. Yeah. Anyway, eventually we managed to get away. Mike Penman was in his man.
Mike Penman.
Mike Penman, a wonderful, wonderful character who used to crawl up to pride of lions armed with nothing but a toilet roll.
Oh, God.
So you can tell the kind of character. He only had a heart, it's soft as butter. There's this wonderful lion he knew called Blackie, and one day Blackie was shot and he was utterly
Destroyed.
completely destroyed. So yeah, Africa is full of wonderful people. They've all led amazing lives, the kind of lives you can't live anywhere else but in Africa.
Yeah. And that is very true, and I think that's why people get so addicted to going back and back and back and back, because there is nowhere else in the world like it, and every single trip is completely different, isn't it? There's always something else that will happen that you'll think that was extraordinary.
You know what I'd say sometimes? It's like going to the theatre. You know the names of all the actors that you're going to see: lion, leopard, cheetah, elephant. But you never know the story. You never know the plot, and the plot is always different.
Yeah, and the plot's always dramatic.
Always dramatic. There's always something. And then even, birds. How many? 2,500 birds. In this country we have the kingfisher. Open the African bird book and there's pages and pages of kingfishers.
Yeah.
And it's like that all the way through. Africa gives you three things we don't have, I think. First of all, abundance. Because of variety of species.
Yeah.
2,500 birds. Abundance, like flocks of pelicans or flamingos.
Yeah.
1.2 million wildebeest. To see them streaming in endless columns that take days to pass.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that. So you have that, and then you have space.
Yeah.
Room to breathe.
Yeah.
Land going out into the Serengeti or down into the Namib, it reaches all the way to the horizon. When you drive there, when you get to the horizon, it's more of the same. Like you can go on and never get to the end. When you come from a lovely but tiny, desperately overcrowded little country like where we live here in the UK, that's what blows me away.
Yeah.
And that feeling of living in the sun and the wind under canvas, and
getting up with the sunrise.
And you're living in the world. You're sharing the lion. You're in the lion's world, and this is the privilege that you pay for. So you become part of it for however long you can afford, a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you have to leave it and return back to civilized life.
But that trip will have changed your life. That trip will have changed your life, changed your perspective.
It does, absolutely changes. Africa does change you.
Yeah, no, it does.
It gets in your blood and you can't get it out.
Yeah.
I think, was it Ernest Hemingway, wonderful quote of his, he said it was something like, there was never a morning in Africa that I never woke up and felt
happy or something.
I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely right. And that's a thing of out of Africa, Isaac Dinesen. Here I am where I belong, and I've always felt that.
Yeah, and that's very clear in your writing, which is incredibly emotive, and it's worth for anyone listening going back over every article you've ever written and all the books, because if you're feeling like you're missing out on Africa because of lockdown, then just read some of Brian's books or articles, because you'll be right back there straight away. Oh my God, that has been absolutely amazing. It's made me feel very, very, very much like I want to get on a plane immediately.
Yes, I wouldn't mind. If I can get myself vaccinated, I'll be off tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed about that. Who knows what will happen with that? But I can't thank you enough for that, Brian. That was absolutely amazing.
The pleasure is all mine. It's always lovely to meet somebody who knows about Africa and who have a good old chat. Yeah.
No, there's probably a lot more that we could say, but I don't want to keep you for the next 3 days. So I think
we should be sitting around a campfire.
I know. Oh, thank you, Brian. Goodbye for now.
Go to Joanna. See you again.